At the request of the Broadcasting and Recording Services, members and visitors in the public gallery are requested to ensure that for the duration of the meeting their mobile phones are switched off or turned completely off to airplane safe or flight mode, depending on their device. It's not sufficient to just put your phone on silent mode, as this will maintain a level of interference with the broadcasting system. Item 5 on the agenda today is an update on developments in the water sector. On behalf of the committee, I would like to welcome to today's meeting from the Department of Housing, Planning and Local Government, Fergus O'Dowd, Mr Eamon Waters and Mr Colin Byrne. From the EPA, Dr Tom Ryan, Mr Darragh Page and Mr Anthony Fanning, and from Irish Water, Mr Eamon Gallen and Mr Michael O'Leary. Before we begin, I wish to draw your attention to the fact that by virtue of Section 172I of the Defamation Act 2009, witnesses are protected by absolute privilege in respect of their evidence given to this committee. However, if you are directed by the committee to cease giving evidence in relation to a particular matter and you continue to so do, you are entitled thereafter only to a qualified privilege in respect of your evidence. You are directed that only evidence connected with the subject matter of these proceedings is to be given, and you are asked to respect the parliamentary practice to the effect that, where possible, you should not criticise nor make charges against any person, persons or entity by name or in such a way as to make him, her or it identifiable. Members are reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that they should not comment on, criticise or make charges against a person outside the Houses or an official either by name or in such a way as to make him or her identifiable. I would now like to call on Fergal to make your opening statement, please.
Thank you, Cahirlock, for giving me this opportunity to update the committee on progress within the water sector. I am joined by my colleagues Eamon Waters, Principal Water Policy and Rural Water Programme, and Colin Byrne, Senior Advisor, Water and Marine Advisory Unit. I note the committee specifically sought briefing on developments in relation to the recast directive on the quality of water intended for human consumption. A separate written update briefing has been provided on this matter, and we will be happy to deal with any questions arising. The Water Services Policy Statement 2018 to 2025, published by Government in May 2018, sets out the broad vision for the development of water and wastewater services in Ireland, whether through the public network or otherwise. The statement, with 3 thematic areas of quality, conservation and future-proofing, is aligned with the River Basin Management Plan for Ireland 2018 to 2021, Project Ireland 2040 and Rebuilding Ireland. Irish Water subsequently published its Strategic Funding Plan 2019 to 2024 as approved by the Minister on 7th of November 2018. Together, the policy statement and the Strategic Funding Plan ensure a shared understanding between Government and Irish Water of the broad financial parameters and investment priorities, and we will be happy to expand on these key documents. The policy statement sets out 4 key principles that provide a useful framework within which I can update you on developments generally across the sector. The principle of one single publicly owned National Water Services Authority is consistent with the recommendations made by the Joint Oireachtas Committee on the future funding of domestic water services and the legislative reforms in the Water Services Acts. In July 2018, the Government decided that Irish Water would become a standalone, publicly owned, commercial, regulated utility, separated from the Ervia Group during 2023. This was considered to be in the best strategic interests of the water services and gas networks businesses. The separation also enhances the heightened level of transparency and accountability required for Irish Water, given the level of exchequer funding being provided to it. In this context, Irish Water has proposed fully integrating its operations and ending the current operational arrangements for delivery of water services through service level agreements, or SLAs, with local authorities. This, of course, will give rise to significant organisational change for local authorities and their staff. To this effect, on the 19th of September 2018, the Director General of the Workplace Relations Commission reported on a process of engagement undertaken at the Minister's request with the parties involved in the transformation programme for Irish Water, including ICTU and the relevant affiliated unions, local government management and the Department. In response to the WRC report, the Minister asked the parties to engage in a process to work towards the development of a stable, structural and operational framework for the future. This engagement is to commence in the coming weeks. Outside of the WRC process, The question of a constitutional amendment on the public ownership of water services is an important consideration in the context of the transformation programme. The Minister's letter of 21st January 2019 to the chairperson of the committee outlines the current position on the matter, and we note also the committee's letter to the Minister received this week. The question of improving accountability through a potential role for the Controller and Auditor General in relation to Irish Water also continues to be explored. In line with the principle of fair and efficient delivery with a customer focus, the Commission for the Regulation of Utilities, or CRU, has a statutory responsibility to regulate the efficient delivery of water services in a balanced and even-handed manner that gives certainty and stability for customers and for Irish Water. The approved Strategic Funding Plan 2019 to 2024 sets out Irish Water's multi-annual strategic funding requirement of €11 billion to 2024, comprising of a €6.1 billion investment in infrastructure and assets and €4.9 billion in operational costs. This certainty about the level of government funding will give Irish Water a reasonable time horizon to plan and work towards achieving cost efficiencies and service improvements during this period. The CRU is also overseeing Irish Water's policy proposals for addressing excess use of water services by domestic customers as required under the Water Services Acts. The amount to be charged for excess use will be determined by the CRU, informed by a public consultation commencing shortly. The aim of this measure, as envisaged by the Oireachtas Committee, is to encourage water conservation rather than to generate revenue. Again, we can discuss this in more detail if required. On the broader issues of public health and the quality of our environment, the Government approved the general scheme of a Water Environment Abstractions Bill to bring us into compliance with the abstraction control requirements of the Water Framework Directive. This will also ensure that there is an appropriate legal framework and consent process in place to facilitate critical capital projects, such as Irish Water's Eastern and Midlands Water Supply Project to serve Dublin and the Mid-East regions. The current expected timeline would see legislation published by summer 2019. The CRU, as economic regulator, has been asked to review the Irish Water's proposed approach to the Eastern and Midlands Water Supply Project. This review report is expected later this year. At a more general level, the important research, analysis and monitoring work undertaken by the Environmental Protection Agency has shown that over the past decade, the quality of our water has stood still at best, and with some concerning indications of decline in certain areas, and you will hear from the EPA shortly. The European Commission has taken infringement cases against Ireland in relation to the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive and the Drinking Water Directive. Of the urban areas where wastewater works are required, the majority will be compliant by end 2021, including Ringsend, which is the single largest wastewater treatment plant in the country, accounting for 41% of the total wastewater load. In relation to the Drinking Water Directive, Ireland has made significant progress in addressing THM, or trihalomethanes, exceedances and public water supplies managed by Irish Water. THMs are formed when chlorine used in drinking water treatment reacts with natural organic matter that remains following pre-treatment processes. Full compliance is expected to be achieved by the end of 2021, with the exception of Loch Talt regional water supply where particular planning difficulties arise. Irish Water has put in place new procedures for informing consumers of water quality issues, where they are served by supplies listed on the EPA Remedial Action List. It is essential that we take strong steps to protect and improve our water quality. The River Basin Management Plan for Ireland 2018 to 2021, published in April 2018, sets out a range of detailed actions and implementing measures. Several specific actions are to be undertaken or are already underway, involving local authorities and a range of state agencies. Again, we can expand on this area as required. Public engagement on the next cycle of river basin management plans to cover the period from 2022 to 2025 is also currently underway. I want to conclude by making a brief mention of some recent developments which serve to strengthen public and stakeholder engagement. The Water Advisory Body is now up and running on a statutory basis. It has been empowered to advise the Minister on the measures needed to improve the transparency and accountability of Irish Water, and to report to the Oireachtas on the performance of Irish Water in the implementation of its business plan. On Fórum Uisce, the National Water Forum is now in place. The purpose of the forum is to provide a national stakeholder-led platform for public engagement on all matters relating to water as an environmental, social and economic resource. The forum provides an opportunity to debate and analyse a range of issues with regard to water quality, rural water concerns, issues affecting customers of Irish Water and the implementation of the EU Water Framework Directive in this jurisdiction. Last week, Minister Murphy announced a revised multi-annual rural water programme. The improved capital programme of €23 million in 2019 provides for increased capital investment in group water schemes, a new grant measure for the development of community water services connections and enhanced grant schemes for private wells and septic tanks. A total of €75 million has been committed under the National Development Plan to 2021. So I've addressed members in a very summary way some of the more significant recent developments in my remarks. I and my colleagues are happy to respond to any questions.
Thank you, Fergus. I'd now like to call on Dr. Tom Ryan from the EPA. Please.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank you for inviting the EPA to contribute to a discussion on developments in the water sector in the context of the EPA's most recent published reports concerning urban wastewater treatment and water quality indicators relating to 2017. I'm joined by my colleagues Darragh Page and Andy Fanning. Both are programme managers in EPA with senior responsibility in the areas under discussion this morning. As you're aware, the EPA is an independent statutory body established under the Environmental Protection Act 1992. We have a wide range of responsibilities, including that of environmental regulator of Irish water. EPA's regulatory activities include the authorisation of wastewater facilities and the enforcement of those authorisations. And the Urban Wastewater Treatment Report Series provides an annual overview of key compliance findings and recommendations in relation to those facilities. In addition, the EPA has statutory responsibility for monitoring the quality of the Irish environment, including the quality of our water courses, and also for providing public access to that monitoring information. The Water Quality Indicators Report Series, which commenced in 2018, is part of EPA's activities to meet its public information responsibility, and it supplements EPA's more comprehensive 3 yearly reports on water quality in Ireland. The EPA's role in wastewater regulation is to regulate discharges under the wastewater discharge regulations as amended. And while Irish Water, as the authorisation holder, is responsible for complying with authorisation conditions, the EPA enforces those conditions through an annual programme of inspections, monitoring and assessments. To enforce compliance, the EPA uses its legislative powers when necessary, up to and including prosecution. While the committee members will note the detailed findings of our Urban Wastewater Treatment Report for 2017, I would highlight a number of them. Of the 179 large towns and cities monitored, wastewater treatment at 28 of them failed to meet the required standards set to prevent pollution and to protect public health. Raw sewage from the equivalent of 86,000 people in 37 towns and villages is still flowing into the Irish environment every day. Wastewater is one of the main threats to the quality of our rivers, lakes and estuaries, and contributed to poor bathing quality in several beaches in 2017. We in EPA acknowledge that these issues have not arisen overnight, that deficiencies exist in many treatment plants and public sewers due to a legacy of underinvestment, and that it is not possible to fix all the issues in the short term. In the meantime, the resources that are available need to be targeted to deliver improvements where they're most needed, and in this regard, the EPA has identified the following as the most pressing issues that need to be addressed. The elimination discharges of untreated wastewater, to treat wastewater from all large urban areas to meet European Union standards, to ensure wastewater does not cause pollution of inland and coastal waters, to improve treatment where required to protect bathing waters, shellfish waters and freshwater pearl mussels, and to rehabilitate or upgrade priority wastewater collection systems. While welcome progress is being made, it is the EPA's position that Ireland is not addressing the deficiencies in wastewater treatment infrastructure at a fast enough pace, and consequently our health is continually exposed to risk, and the water quality of our rivers, lakes and coastal waters continues to be negatively impacted. The EPA has a statutory role in monitoring the quality of the environment more broadly, including a specific responsibility for a programme of monitoring to provide a comprehensive overview of water quality status in Ireland. And to this end, we work with local authorities, Inland Fisheries Ireland, the Marine Institute and Waterways Ireland. Arising from this work and as part of our public information role, we published a Water Indicators Report for 2017. Each indicator in the report summarises a particular water quality parameter and presents the current situation and an indication of recent change. And I'd highlight a number of findings in the report. There has been a net overall decline of 3% in good water quality over the 2 years 2016 and 2017. Long-term loss of high-quality river sites is continuing with a further 0.6% decline since 2015. Now, most water pollution is caused by too much nitrogen and phosphorus entering waters coming from human activities, predominantly our farms and urban areas. The increases in nutrients identified in the report are an early warning that we need to address the sources and the pathways by which these nutrients make their way into our rivers and lakes. On the positive side, the report also found that serious pollution continues to decrease, and fish kills were at an all-time low in 2017. In summary, Chair, the signals in this report are not good and tell us that water quality is still getting worse in some areas despite improvements in others. However, the success in addressing serious pollution and the reduction in fish kills shows that we can make positive changes with appropriate interventions through targeted investment in infrastructure in tandem with improved operational practices. Chair, again, I'd like to thank the committee for its interest in this important area of environmental protection, and the EPA delegation will be happy to take any questions that committee members may have. Thank you.
Tom, I'd now like to call Mr. Eamon Gallen from Irish Water.
Good morning. My name is Eamon Gallen. I'm the Acting Managing Director of Irish Water. I'm joined here today by Michael O'Leary, who is the General Manager, and Catherine Walsh, who is the Head of Asset Operations. I'd like to thank the Chair, Ms Maria Bailey TD, and the Committee for the opportunity to provide a general update on progress and developments in the water sector. I'd just like to point out we have slides up here that are in sequence with the Word document, so there's no need to pay too much attention to them. 2018 presented many challenges to Irish Water's operations. We had two major storms, a number of serious incidents and a 1 in 70-year drought, which put our resources under significant pressure. The Irish Water Crisis Management Team was mobilised for long and sustained periods of the year, managing these events. While the effort required during this instance was a considerable draw on the organisation, by working closely and collaboratively with our partners in the local authorities, the Department and a number of agencies including the EPA, CRU, HSE, IFI, ESB, OPW and others, we managed to keep the water and wastewater plants and networks operating despite very challenging conditions. Field staff, supported by logistical, procurement, communications and management teams, worked tirelessly to minimise the impact on the people of Ireland. Managing national incidents does help Irish Water to continuously refine our response to future events. We now have stores of spare parts, large static water containers and bottled water supplies strategically located, and arrangements are in place to mobilise tankers at short notice. In addition, we work closely with our supply chain to ensure that we have ready availability of critical equipment such as standby generators, etc. We regularly test our processes, including communication protocols, and we are key participants in the National Emergency Coordination Group. The most prolonged disruption to water services in 2018 was the drought, with water levels in rivers, lakes and aquifers reaching critical lows. Working with our partners in the local authorities, our plants around the country were operating at maximum capacity, but unfortunately water restrictions became unavoidable in the worst affected areas. The first National Water Conservation Order, which are commonly known as the hosepipe ban, came into effect in July and orders remained in place until September. We launched a nationwide water conservation campaign encouraging households and businesses to reduce water consumption where possible. The response to this campaign was extremely positive and water consumption fell across the country as a result. While we were extremely grateful for the excellent response from members of the public, the 2018 drought highlighted in stark terms that despite Ireland having an abundant supply of raw water, many of our current water abstractions and supply networks lack the resilience and flexibility to deal with these extreme weather events. This is the key challenge that will be addressed in the National Water Resources Plan to be launched in 2019. In addition to managing the day-to-day operational challenges, Irish Water continued maintaining, repairing and upgrading drinking and wastewater infrastructure through our capital investment programme. We invested €670 million across the country to make our water supply safer and more reliable and to improve wastewater treatment and reduce its impact on the environment. 22 drinking water schemes supplying 166,000 customers were upgraded and removed from the EPA's remedial action list known as the RAL. Disinfection was improved for a further 80 plants supplying another 240,000 customers. We wrote directly to 165,000 householders and businesses whose water supply remains on the RAL to explain to them the current status of the quality of their drinking water supply, the specific project or projects Irish Water will deliver to deal with that risk, and how long it will take for these to be completed. Important projects like the Kerry Central Regional Water Supply Scheme, the Ballyboden Reservoir, Saline Pipeline and Swords Water Main Rehab were all completed in 2018 and 300 kilometres of old, poor quality water mains were replaced with new pipes. We will invest €500 million up to 2021 on our leakage reduction programme, systematically finding and fixing leaks, repairing and replacing valves and bulk meters, replacing old backyard lead services and corroded cast iron pipework, and completing first fix repairs on private property right across the country. On the wastewater side, 6 wastewater treatment plants were completed so that raw sewage is no longer discharged at Youghal, Ringaskiddy, Bundoran, Killybegs, Belmullet and Rush. The positive impact on the marine environment and bathing water qualities in these coastal areas is significant and immediate. Priority works continues on the remaining 37 sites, some of which are at construction stage and the remainder are planning, so that this practice will largely be eliminated by 2021. Having prioritised drinking water quality in recent years, our public water wastework network is still in an extremely poor condition, and this will take many years and hundreds of millions of euro to properly repair and replace. We have started this work, and in 2018 we surveyed 175 kilometres of sewer pipes and refurbished 47 kilometres in priority areas. As has been highlighted many times, it will take decades and significant investment to bring Ireland's wastewater infrastructure up to the required standards. In 2018, Irish Water submitted 53 planning applications and 40 CPOs to progress critical projects. Throughout the year, we engaged with our stakeholders and members of the public at local, regional and national level, and this ongoing engagement is a priority for Irish Water and will continue into 2019 and beyond. While we are completing projects in every county in Ireland, key milestones were reached in strategic projects that will have an important positive impact at a national level, both in economic and environmental terms. In Cork Harbour, where up to last year 10,000 tonnes of untreated sewage was pumped into the sea every day, the Cork Harbour main drainage project has now reduced that volume by half, connecting Ringaskiddy, Carrigaline and Crosshaven to the new treatment plant at Shanbally. The drilling of a subsea tunnel in 2019 will connect Passage West, Glenbrook, Monkstown and Cove and allow the project to be completed in 2021 with a huge positive impact on the marine environment around Cork Harbour. On the east coast, the Vartu tunnel, built with exceptional vision in the 1860s, was decommissioned in late 2018 with the completion of a new pipeline to bring treated water from Roundwood and Wicklow to South Dublin. An upgraded treatment plant is under construction at Vartu and work is well underway to upgrade and cover the existing reservoirs to Lorgan, ensuring the quality of drinking water supply for 200,000 customers in Wicklow and Dublin. Subject to the passing of necessary legislation, we anticipate that a planning application will be made to Bord Pleanála in late 2019 that will secure a new sustainable water source for the Eastern and Midland region up to 2050. Ringsend Wastewater Treatment Plant, which treats 40% of Ireland's wastewater, will have a new upgrade completed in 2022 to deal with its serious capacity challenges. A planning application was submitted to Bord Pleanála in 2018 for the Greater Dublin Drainage Project, which will provide wastewater treatment capacity also up to 2050. The combination of these drinking water and wastewater projects will ensure that current and future growth of the Greater Dublin area and Eastern Midlands regions will have the critical water infrastructure required. Over the past 5 years, Irish Water has established and consolidated a national strategic capability to manage, improve and future-proof public water infrastructure to secure Ireland's economic growth and protect the environment. All future capital and operational investment will be in accordance with the 3 thematic areas as set out in the Government's 2018 Water Services Policy Statement. With clarity around funding and policy, the next stage for Irish Water is to become a standalone, publicly owned, commercially regulated utility, and key to this is the transfer of staff from local authorities. We welcome the invitation to participate in talks expected to begin shortly at the Workplace Relations Commission, involving the unions as representatives of the staff, the LGMA, CCMA and the DHPLG to develop a framework for the future which would replace the current service level agreements we have with local authorities. Irish Water will increase capital investment by 150 to 820 million in 2019. We are extremely vigilant in terms of value for money from a public procurement point of view and will work closely with our economic regulator, the CRU and the CRU to target further efficiencies in our capital and operational costs. By the end of 2019, we aim to complete work that will allow the EPA to assess a further 33 drinking water supplies for removal from the RAL, and with regard to untreated agglomerations, 2 more projects will be completed to stop discharge of raw sewage. Work will continue on the drainage area plans, or DAPs, across the country. Irish Water will publish our National Water Resources Plan, outlining a new approach to how we manage our water resources nationally. Ireland is not a water-stressed country, but we need to fundamentally change how we manage available water resources. We will implement key policy initiatives in 2019, including a revised water tariff regime for businesses, which will be published shortly by the CRU, and the new connections policy, which will go live in April of this year. We will also encourage water conservation and provide free first-fix leak repairs for households whose water usage is very high to help them reduce consumption and avoid excess use charges. While 2018 was a particularly challenging year, we believe that Irish Water, working in partnership with the local authorities and our supply chain, managed to keep water and wastewater services operating in often very challenging circumstances. We achieved record capital delivery targets, improving the quality of drinking water and reducing untreated wastewater discharges across the country. While the challenges facing us are significant, we believe that we will continue to perform strongly, safeguarding our water resources for future generations. Thank you very much for your time, and we will be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Eamon. Our first questioner is Deputy Casey.
Thank you, Chair. Most of my questions probably aimed at our Irish Water, as opposed to, and thank you all for your submissions. Just in relation to a few quick things that wasn't touched on, and some of them are outside your own control. And I'll start off with the commercial harmonisation of rates, which I know the CRU still haven't published, and I think it's disappointing. Irish Water is now established 6 years and we still don't have a harmonisation process in place for commercial rates, and you're looking at significant difference in where Wicklow is 304 per cubic metre and Kildare is 159, with the largest possible user of water in Kildare being Intel. And just maybe if you could give us an update on when you think that will be sorted out. And I acknowledge at long last that the CRU did publish the Development Contribution Scheme, or as we used to refer to it in the local authorities, and it's coming in roughly at 6,200 per dwelling unit on average. Just in relation to that, is there I'm a bit confused when I read it in relation to this. There's the infrastructure investment and then there's the connection. Is there another fee on top of that 6,200 to get connected? And maybe if you could confirm that when you come back into it. Just in relation to one area and that I've always had a concern about is indeed the development of infrastructure in rural Ireland. And in my own county, and indeed a number of my colleagues' counties, most of our smaller towns and indeed villages have no capacity to develop or take on any development. And I wonder, is there a plan there anywhere in relation to this process where we can get down into rural Ireland and start upgrading the wastewater facilities in our towns and villages? Because I equally believe it can be part of the solution to the housing crisis. Because I know a lot of villages in Wicklow are stagnating now. They haven't had a housing development in over 20 years. It's now beginning to affect the schools. But in most of these small villages under 1,000, there's no wastewater or water capacity. And I'm just wondering, from your own point of view, are you focusing in on that? Is there any specific funding being ring-fenced for the smaller rural type villages so that they can develop as well and be part of the solution? And if not, is there a process available where developers can engage with Irish Water and can maybe offer some contribution to the upgrade of existing plants in these areas? And if there is there a process that has to be followed? And is that process, I suppose, public to everybody to view? And how do you calculate that, or is it on a one-to-one basis? Just on a few positive notes, congratulate you on the work in relation to the drought last year. I think it worked very well. I still think we have to educate people, even though we start shouting about drought in June, that it's really September that we're worried about. And even though they kept saying to me, oh, the reservoir's full. And I said, well, come back in September and it won't be full. So I think, you know, while I think it was exceptionally good and it got the message out there and it worked, I still believe we probably could do a bit more on the education point of view on that. I want to acknowledge another town in Oireachtas and acknowledge that the oral hearing in relation to the planning process for the wastewater treatment plant has happened, and that is one that is discharging raw sewage into the river. So I welcome any progress on that. That's just a few points in relation to Irish Water. Just in relation to the EPA, and you describe 179 large towns and 28 of them are polluting. What do you define as a large town, and what? So that I'm trying to get a handle of where we are in population growth. And the other thing I'm interested in, we still don't seem to have reached the capital investment that we need to reach to fix the water infrastructure problem, because we're still at in around state invention of 86, 87 million. We were at that figure back in 2007 and 8, so we're only got back to that level. So we haven't really increased the level of capital funding from the state into water services, and maybe the department could maybe engage in that. That's just a few initial observations.
First, Eamon.
First of all, thanks very much for your comments about the drought, and you're absolutely right about the education piece. At the moment, we're actually making plans already for Loughool in Mullingar, so the drought hits us early, and September is actually the driest month of the year, well, one of the top 3 normally every year, which a lot of people aren't aware of. Michael is going to deal with your questions about rural development, and I'm going to deal with the tariff harmonisation and the connections. On the tariff harmonisation, it is up to the CRU to manage the consultation process, and we will deal with what comes out of that. We have obviously made in a submission on it, and we've been hopeful that this will progress a long way down the road in 2019. It's likely to be 2020 before charges will actually be applied, because we have to do IT systems upgrades, we have to notify people, etc. And then there will be a glide path for customers moving on to the tariffs. Your own county is particularly high in charges, absolutely, and it's right next door to the lowest in the country. In fact, you're the highest and lowest next door to each other for a lot of cases, and there is an equity there. And a big thing that will come out of the tariff harmonisation is equity across the country. We would say that out of tariff harmonisation, 80% of customers will have a rise in charges of less than 250 or a reduction in charges. So overall, the vast majority of customers will not see a huge increase in tariffs. However, there will be some that will be affected. So with the CRU are looking at glide paths and things like that, and determination will have to come in that. So in short, we would see that 2019 there'll be a lot of progress with charges applying in 2020. With regard to the connection schemes, no, there's just one charge, and that's it. It's all in for a connection. When it comes to developers, we absolutely do engage with developers, and they can do it two ways. They can either do it in bulk, which means that they can enter into an agreement, whether the payments are staged or upfront, for multiple housing units, or they can break them into smaller chunks at the same rates, so that they don't have to invest in all 100 houses before the first 20 sold. And we work with developers on that. We deal with small developers, big developers, but if there are large-scale developers, we absolutely put dedicated account managers on them to help them work through that. So, for example, if you go over 300 houses, you can get, we will quote you separate rates for wastewater and over 270 or 250 for water, but up to that, they're all standard. But again, we will engage with developers, everything from timing to phasing of payments, etc.
Just on the rural development, Deputy Casey, I suppose Irish Water is committed to the LIHAF programme, which is funded by the government, which assists with local infrastructure and housing in small towns and villages. The Irish Water Draft Investment Plan contains a proposal for small towns and villages, which is aimed particularly at smaller settlements to provide water and wastewater infrastructure. And we'll be working very closely with the local authorities in terms of identifying where that investment is needed. I suppose in terms of the National Water Resources Plan, we have the intention that we're going to visit every single local authority to address, I suppose, water and wastewater issues with the local developer and the local planners in terms of what's needed and where it's needed, and working with them and using the funding through the LIHAF programme and the Small Towns and Villages programme in the investment plan, that there'll be targeted improvements to infrastructure to facilitate what you're looking for, the local housing and development.
Tom?
The definition of a larger agglomeration or larger city or town is derives from the requirement in the directive to have secondary treatment in place. So it's different depending on where the discharge is to, but effectively, in short, if the discharge is to an inland water, a river or a lake, it's above 2,000 population. If it's to a coastal area, it's 10,000, because anything above that as a minimum requires secondary treatment in place. Now, it may require additional treatment, but as the minimum, it requires secondary.
Fergal? Do you want to, or
Definitely, I suppose you asked about the long-term investment and is there sufficient resources being made available? I think it actually is very important to appreciate that as a result of the total debate on water, I think we have a very strong policy context in terms of the water services policy statement, strategic funding plans, and commitment from government for increasing resource under the NDP to deliver on our shared objectives. So, for example, the capital expenditure is expected to increase from 856 million in 2019 to 1.3 billion in 2024. So there is an increasing allocation for the capital investment needs. And I think we are looking for the long term, not just the next 5 to 7 years, but also in the next 25 years, that we put in place the capital investment necessary to underpin good quality environment and economic development in the country.
Owen?
Thanks very much, Chair. Thanks for all of the presentations. I've kind of 4 areas of questions. I want to start with the Environmental Protection Agency reports. We've given a commitment in this committee, I think now over 3 years, that every time the reports are published, one of the key things we want to do is get all of the stakeholders in to kind of interrogate the reports, not only to give the EPA another platform to raise the issues, but then to hear directly from both Irish Water and the department. So I'm keen to hear their views on it. One of the things that concerns me is, and if you look at the appendices in the report, you see, for example, the 132 areas where improvements are needed to resolve environmental priorities. You'll see the list there of the 28 large urban areas that haven't met the directive and the 38 urban areas discharging untreated water. When we compare those to the 2016 report, while at one level there are reductions, so in 2016, for example, there was 148 urban areas that were of concern to the EPA. The difficulty is the reduction isn't a straightforward net reduction. Some areas are actually being added to the list, so that while some are coming off, some are being added on. And it would seem to me that that's kind of counterintuitive, because you would have thought, you know, as the capital investment increases, as the planning permissions come through, we should just see a gradual reduction overall. You wouldn't see new areas slipping. So I want to express that as a concern, and I'd be interested in all three organisations' views on that. What I'd also draw Irish Water and the Department's point of attention to, one of Tom's sentences is a very strong criticism that we're not addressing these issues fast enough. So notwithstanding the very significant increase in capital investment, that the speed isn't enough. And of course that confirms where the European Court of Justice decision was at as well. So one of the questions I asked the last time, and I'm raising it again, is while overall capital expenditure is increasing, is an adequate proportion of that going to tackle the various issues that are identified in the Environmental Protection Agency's report, particularly the larger number of the 132 urban areas where improvements are needed? We had seen, for example, in 2014, 15 and 16, overall levels of investment in upgrading wastewater treatment plants and networks reduced dramatically. That does seem to have moved in the right direction, but can you give us maybe a bit of a breakdown as to what percentage of or what quantum of the capital investment is going into those particular works? I'd also like, if the Department's in a position, to give us an update on where things are at with the European Court of Justice and the European Commission. I understand even after the negative judgment of the ECJ, there's clearly a period of time where the state gets to kind of demonstrate that it's getting its house in order. Are you comfortable that and the work that your colleagues in Irish Water are doing is convincing the European Commission that we're on track? Are you comfortable that if we meet the targets as you've outlined by 2021, we won't be facing significant European Court of Justice fines for further non-compliance? So can you give us a kind of an updated read on all of that? In terms of the Shannon pipeline, two of the issues which have been a regular feature of our discussions here is while most of us absolutely accept the need to diversify Dublin and the region's water supply and to increase capacity, two of the issues we keep coming back to are whether or not there is any additional capacity in aquifers in the Midlands and Eastern region, and also whether we can have an acceleration of leakage reduction in the public water system. I do understand that Irish Water was going to, or VIA was going to conduct some updated surveys around aquifers, if you can give us information around that. And again, I suppose, look, every time we ask this question, we get the same answer, which is leakage reduction in the public system is very, very difficult in Temple Bar. Yes, it is, but all of Dublin isn't like Temple Bar. And I suppose, are we going to see any acceleration of the leakage reduction in the public water system? None of that is an argument for or against the Shannon Pipeline project. I suppose I just want to once again express the concern. If the pipeline goes ahead as is currently proposed, 40% of the water that's going to be pumped across the state is going to be lost immediately in the network, and that just doesn't seem to make economic or environmental sense. So are we still in the same position, or has there been any improvement in that? And from the Department's point of view, are we going to get the abstraction licensing legislation this year? Can you give us an update on that? Is that going to delay the planning application? I know, Eamon, you said the application will go in latter end of this year. Your predecessor was telling us that it was going to go in at an earlier stage. My understanding is the delay wasn't at the Irish Water's end, it was to do with the abstraction legislation. That may or may not be the case, but if people can give us a view on that, that would be helpful. And then the last thing is on the single utility. Look, obviously there are elements of that negotiation which are a matter for the employer and the unions, particularly in terms of the legacy costs that the City and County Managers Association are concerned with, and the terms and conditions as the workers are concerned with, and I'll leave that to the WRC process. But I think many of us here have two very significant public policy concerns, and I suppose I'm interested in people's response. The first is whether the single utility is commercial or non-commercial, and it makes a big difference. Now, I understand, and we've spoken about this before, that Airvia and Irish Water's preference is for a commercial utility because it has borrowing capacity and maybe a little bit more independence from the annual budgetary cycle. Given that it's on balance sheet, I'm not really sure that's the case. And given that the borrowings are still more expensive if they're in the commercial context from the private sector, I suppose, has any consideration been given to finding a way of ensuring funding security for the capital investment programme, which we all agree is needed, but in a non-commercial semi-state context? So during the Dáil Water Committee, we spent quite a lot of time wondering how you could provide that funding certainty to a non-commercial public water utility, for example, through contractual relationships, not unlike you have with design-build operators, where you guarantee capital funding, whether it's loan or exchequer, over a set period of time, and there's a legally binding commitment from the department. And I think if Irish Water had their funding certainty, they probably wouldn't care too much if they were commercial or non-commercial. The value from the taxpayer's point of view is the borrowing is cheaper, so it makes more financial sense. It probably would also assist you in your IR stuff with the trade unions, because they'd have public sector pay agreement. And likewise on the referendum, look, I realise this is a matter for Cabinet, and you probably can't answer the question, but let me express the frustration anyway. We've been talking around this referendum now for over 2 years. Second stage was passed, the legislation from John Collins and the rest of us, in October 2016. You are going to have a really difficult job convincing the unions, I think, from the outside, in relation to the package of issues that the WRC is going to look at if there isn't a date for a referendum. And again, that's a matter for Cabinet, and it's a matter for the Minister and the AG. This committee, or many of us, are growing increasingly frustrated that there's kind of a promise of a referendum, but the longer that gap stretches, the more difficult it's going to be for many people, both in the political process and in the union and the employee end of things, to take that political commitment seriously. So I just want to emphasise the importance of that referendum. It was the single biggest issue of submissions to the government's expert group. It was a major preoccupation of the Water Committee when we were here. So I know you can't tell us when it's going to happen and when the wording is going to be there, but just, without that, I think that process is going to come into very big difficulties. But I'm particularly interested in Irish Water and the Department's responses to the EPA's concerns, and particularly that list at the end of the appendices of the 2017 report. Thanks, Chair.
Let's start with Eamon.
I'm going to deal briefly with the EPA. Michael will deal with the investment and also deal with the WRC, and I'll deal with the rest. And if I miss anything, we'll try and pick it up. So just without getting into the deeper detail of the figures, Michael will cover that on the EPA side. Just some of the statistics you're saying that we're going down and then coming back up. If I use the example of the Dirty 44, people would have been familiar with, they were the untreated agglomerations where we were discharging untreated water or effluent into watercourses and into the sea. Standards have risen, so more things get caught in the net, and there's more audits, etc., going on. So it started at 44, went up to 50 in total, and is now down at 37. Again, as I said earlier, we plan to have most of those off by 2021. There will be some that will probably take a little bit longer, but they'll be well underway by 2021. So again, what happens is you start at 44, standards go up, so more things fall under the bar and they're added to the list, or there's more intensive audits and things go on. But overall, we've come from 50 down to 37. We'll get another 2 next year, and again, substantially most by 2021. Again, Michael will deal with some of the specifics around the investment. With regard to the Eastern Midlands Water Supply Project, you're absolutely right. Besides anything else, it's a very difficult message to sell. Say we'll take the message from the Shannon, bring it up to Dublin and push it into Dublin's foundations. What we would say to you is we are working very hard on the leakage side to get leakage down. Leakage alone will not solve this problem for us, but we have €500 million aside nationally between now and 2021 to get leakage down. Our target is 166 million litres a day, 44 million litres a day of which will be in Dublin, which will make a significant difference, but won't get you down as far as you need to get. At the moment, and these things do fluctuate seasonally and otherwise, we're at 45% leakage nationally and 35% in Dublin, so it's still an awful lot of water considering we produce around 600 million litres a day. 200 million litres leaking is an awful lot of water, and we absolutely have to get that down. Just on the broader point of the need for the water supply project, if you take the fact that Dublin, 85% of Dublin's water, which is 45% of the Liffey's flow, is one source. There is, besides anything else, you need a security of supply solution there. And as well as that, it is likely at 45% that is not sustainable long term. So besides the fact of the pure supply, we have issues around security of supply and resilience for the capital city and indeed the Midlands region, which will take 30% of the water. With regard to aquifers, we are actively all the time looking at alternative sources of water, and we're actually intensifying that at the moment because If the water supply project is delayed for whatever reasons, and there's lots and lots of reasons it could be delayed, we will have to keep water going into Dublin. So we're actively looking for alternative sources, not least if some water-intensive industries came into the country, they will need water immediately and we have to be able to supply them. So in answer to that question, we absolutely are doing that all the time, and we have recently intensified that, and we're about to embark a multi-million euro programme specifically down towards the Meath and then south of Dublin area to try and see if there's more water available, and we will continue with that. Yeah, I think those two issues are going to. I would hand over to Michael for that.
I suppose, Deputy, just maybe first looking at the spend, and I suppose just a general comment to start with, that when Irish Water initially started out on the capital investment programme, by necessity the focus had to be on the drinking water side, and that the public health issues arising from same. So I suppose that was the primary focus at the start, and I suppose, as Eamon alluded to in his submission, the progress that has been made on the drinking water is evident in terms that by the end of 2019 we'll be down to about 30 schemes left on the EPA's remedial action list. But that pendulum now is very much swinging towards the wastewater spend, and year on year now spend on wastewater is increasing, so that by 2020-2021 the actual spend on wastewater will exceed that on drinking water. And if you look at the projections for 2022, what we'll be spending on wastewater is nearly the total of what we spent last year on the full capital investment programme. So right up to 2024.
Do you have a breakdown for last year in terms of the wastewater versus drinking water?
Yeah, if you take 2018, the spend on wastewater was 230 and the spend on drinking water was 396. And if you look forward, then we'll say to 2022, the spend on wastewater will be 511, whereas on drinking water it will be 361. And that will continue up to 2024, where the spend on both drinking water and wastewater, then wastewater will come back down and the two will merge, and we'll see from there on then what the spend will be. So in terms, I suppose, like, we are confident, and we work very closely with the department and with our colleagues in the EPA in terms of where targeted spend, as Tom said, and prioritising that spend, and just maybe looking at some of the locations in the 28 of the 179 large agglomerations. Works will be completed at 21 of these by 2021, and the 6 remaining will be addressed by 2024. If you look at the 57 locations that are identified in the EPA report, impacting on water quality, we've completed upgrade works at 36 of these locations, and we're carrying out assessments of the balance, and again that will be completed by 2024. And Eamon has alluded to the untreated agglomerations, which started out at the dirty 44, is now the dirty 50, but we have removed, we'll say, 44% of that raw storage that's discharging. So I suppose the EPA and ourselves, we know what the priorities are, and we work very closely with them. We acknowledge that the speed heretofore may not have been required, but there were reasons for that. But certainly the pendulum now is swinging towards the wastewater side, and we should see an acceleration of compliance in that regard. Just very, I suppose, briefly touching on the single public utility and the WRC, and conscious that we're getting into talks very shortly with the WRC. I don't want to get into too much detail, but from an Irish Water perspective, we're publicly owned, we're primarily an in-source business. Commercial has importance to us. We're regulated. We want to be commercial and we want to be regulated. And I suppose commercial goes beyond the boundaries of where the funding comes from. It has other benefits from the types of contracts and things like that that we can enter into. So certainly from an Irish Water perspective, we'd be very much in the corner of where we want to continue to be publicly owned, commercial and regulated. Thanks, Deputy.
Thank you, Chair. Just to the Deputy addressed the specific question around the EPA priority areas, as in Appendix A in our report, I suppose, and while the numbers might fluctuate a little bit, I suppose there are two main components to that. One is the investment needed to address the legacy of poor infrastructure and bringing that up to standard. And there is an investment plan there, and we talk about the pace of investment there and all of that. The other component then is operational. So there will always be ongoing issues in plants that may bring it in and out of compliance. There may be increased pressures on a particular area where an agglomeration increases in size, and that puts pressure on a plant, and then that has to be brought up to specification to deal with that capacity. So, you know, there will always be ongoing regulatory issues there. And I suppose just to emphasise that, you know, there's no end point here. It will require continual investment over decades, both to bring the plants up to spec and to maintain an appropriate level of water quality treatment.
Okay, definitely. Yeah, thanks very much. Just again, in a general sense, I think it's important to maybe re-emphasise that we do have a really good suite, a really good policy infrastructure now. And I think all three bodies, ourselves in the Department, the EPA and Irish Water, are working to a common agenda. And it's absolutely right that the EPA should keep our feet to the fire on that, as does indeed the European Commission, which is addressed your next question. But I do think we're all on a clear trajectory that by 2021 or thereabouts we will have dealt more or less or almost with those urban wastewater treatment directive shortcomings. Now we do expect a judgment in the European Court of Justice at the end of March, and you're right, the process will then be a judgment. If it's an adverse judgment, the Commission, we would then enter negotiations to Commission as to how we address that judgment before the Commission would think of taking next steps. And I would be hopeful, given the Government's commitment and the level of investment under the NDP and the clear work programme of Irish Water, that we will be able to get a good outcome there.
Do you think on the wastewater, the judgment that obviously is against us, do you think the programme that you have will be sufficient to avoid fines if you meet those targets by 2021?
Look, we will certainly be putting that case to the Commission, that we do have a really clear trajectory, but we have to deliver on that to make sure we have credibility. I mean, there are areas in terms of the world of the environment in Ireland where maybe in the past we've lacked credibility in terms of delivery. So we really have to deliver on this to ensure that we avoid fines. But we will be engaging. I think we do have a very good story to tell when we engage with the Commission. But they, as we know from other worlds, they negotiate quite hard. So they won't give us an easy passage. So we will all be put to the pin of our collar to deliver. And again, we have other issues in relation to water and fresh infringement action in relation to water. I think the Commission, no more than, as Tom said in relation to the EPA, that it's a continual issue, the need to invest. The Commission, in terms of compliance with the directives, this is also a continuing process. They look at each member state. If they feel they're not in compliance, we'll take them to court, and we'll keep revisiting to ensure that we are in compliance, and we're not the only member state in that place. In relation to the legislation on abstraction, yes, we are hopeful that we will publish it this year. We said by the summer. We had a general scheme which was agreed by government in July. There was public consultation on that. We've had comments back. There are complexities in the area. The issue of water rights is an issue, so it's taken us a little bit of time to work through that, but we will be giving that some priority to try and deliver the legislation. It should be noted that the Minister asked the Commission for the Regulation of Utilities to review the project itself, the Shannon project itself, and that's expected to take most of this year. So look, I think planning, the review, the legislation, these things need to happen in parallel rather than necessarily be sequential, so to minimise particular delays. You mentioned the transformation process, and obviously going into the WRC process in the coming weeks. The issues in relation to local authorities have issues in relation to legacy costs, and we had a meeting with the CCMA on that again yesterday. The unions want to talk to the Department in relation to the status of Irish Water, that commercial, non-commercial issue, at the referendum. I think in relation to the commercial, non-commercial issue, as Michael pointed out, there are advantages to commercial nature of the company. But I think sometimes people think it's one or the other. It's a zero sum. It's a non-commercial body or it's a commercial body. In fact, this is a public utility. It'll be 80% funded by the taxpayer. It's, as Michael says, an in-source model. So it's not like a profit-making commercial body that you will get in other areas of the semi-state sector. It's government policy that it would act in a commercial fashion, that it would drive efficiency. It's regulated by the regulator. So there are commercial features that are considered very important, as well as features of a public utility that are also equally important. And I don't think it's a zero-sum game in that regard, but I appreciate that the unions have a position on that. The referendum, you mentioned that. Just to reiterate the position, the Minister did bring proposals to government. They're being considered by the Attorney General, and we met the Attorney General's office. We're in constant contact with them, but we don't have a final time frame for the delivery of a final wording. I think that's most issues.
Okay, thank you. Mick.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I have to say that I feel that this is a bit of a strange meeting. It's a bit of a weird meeting. We have TDs, senators, representatives of Irish Water, the Environmental Protection Agency and the Department. 12 from those 4 groups here at the moment. And every single one is a man. There isn't a single woman from those 4 groups sitting around the table, up front at the table here. And I think what tends to happen at meetings when this is pointed out is the point is noted, and then you move on and you discuss the real business of the meeting. But I'm going to give over some of my 10 minutes to asking some questions, which are pertinent questions, about that. And I'll start with a question to the representatives of Irish Water. And the question that I have is to ask you, what percentage of your senior management team is currently made up of women?
30% of the Irish Water senior management team is women. And just to say, it's just a logistic thing. Catherine actually managed all of the operations side through all the crises last year. She was in charge of the asset operations right across the country. So it's just a seating arrangement. But Catherine would have been instrumental in our performance in 2018.
Catherine is the woman.
This is Catherine Walsh, head of asset operations, Irish Water.
We just couldn't facilitate Catherine here because of the restrictions of the seats.
We couldn't facilitate Catherine because of the restrictions of the seats.
Sorry, apologies, actually 40%, I beg your pardon. We have 4 out of 10, sorry, my apologies.
I'm not sure I understand the point that Catherine couldn't be facilitated because of the restrictions of the seats.
There's only the 8 seats in the meeting.
Well, I actually don't think it's pedantic. I actually think it tells a story, and it tells a story about what goes on in this place far too much. And I am making a bit of a point about it this morning, and I'll move on and I'll ask the Environmental Protection Agency
move on then, please.
As to what percentage of the Environmental Protection Agency's senior management team is made up of women.
Tom?
Chair, yes. The structure of the EPA is that we have an executive board. There are 6 members on that. 2 are women, including our DG. And then we have 12 senior managers at programme manager level, and 4 of those are females.
Okay. And finally, to the Water Division section of the Department of Housing, the same question: what percentage of senior management in your department is made up of women?
Yeah, I think it should be noted of the 7 assistant secretaries in the department, 3 are women. And in fact, I've just replaced Maria Graham, who was a long-standing woman in charge of the water area, both as principal officer and assistant secretary. over the last 8 or 9 years and who had to soldier through the difficult period. So it's just been, I have come into that position. And in terms of my own team, I actually have, at the moment, I only have 3 out of 6 senior positions filled within my team, of whom 1 is a woman, and there's 3 positions are being filled at the moment under process. So I think in terms of, it just happens that I have in recent weeks replaced the female assistant secretary in this post.
Okay, Chair, I'm going to move on and ask my water-related questions. Before I do, I'll just make one point. I don't think it's good that at the committee this morning that we have had this situation. I think that the committee needs to have a discussion about avoiding situations like this in future. It shouldn't happen. And I'm also not comfortable about continuing the meeting with a situation where we have an all-male panel, 8 people, and a woman from one of the organisations who sits on a seat in the background because the seating arrangements couldn't be facilitated this morning. Is there something that we can do about that before we progress? It's a question.
Thank you. Well, if Irish Water want to swap somebody out,
or if somebody wishes to sit in this seat, they're very welcome.
No, they don't.
Okay, Chair, my 2 questions.
Okay.
I'll ask them both together. The first one is regarding the Commission for the Regulation of Utilities. It has a public consultation starting shortly. The public consultation is to do with the amount to be charged for this new excessive use charge, which obviously my party believes is a Trojan horse for water charges, but we take a keen interest in what's happening here. So the question is, when precisely is that public consultation going to start? And if you can't give us a date, perhaps you could tell us in the number of months or the number of weeks. The second question is in relation to the preparations for the single water utility. The WRC is playing a role in bringing together the department, local government management, the ICTU and the unions for an engagement on this issue. And we are told that this engagement will commence in the coming weeks. Again, can we be more precise on that? And if we can't have a date, are we looking at the month of February? Are we looking at the month of March? Are we looking at the month of April? When is that commencement due to start? I think the need for a constitutional referendum on keeping water in public ownership is very important. Reference has been made to it this morning. I think that this has been delayed and delayed and delayed by the Minister. But I welcome the fact that the committee has got a hearing on progressing this coming up very soon, and I think that that's an important meeting that we will be focusing on. So the questions relate to the engagement with the unions and to the question of the public consultation. Sinead.
Eamon, do you want to? Or Catherine,
just take the WRC question first, Deputy. Any day we're expecting an invite from the WRC to attend. It could be next week or it could be the following week. I know that the WRC are currently checking with all parties to come up with a suitable starting date for the discussions. So we would certainly hope that it will be within the month of February that we start, and how long it will take thereafter, we don't know.
Question is.
Yep. Sorry, I just want to correct something again. Apologies. We actually have 5 out of 11 are women: head of legal, head of HR, head of asset operations, head of customer operations, and we actually have an acting head of environment regulation. Apologies. And we also have a head of corporate affairs who's cross-functional assistant as well. So you could say 6 out of 12, but apologies, I just gave you the wrong numbers there. I left out somebody who's acting. So with regard to the excessive use charging, that'll be subject to a consultation process run by the CRU. As you know, that's government policy, and we don't come up with policy, we implement it. From our point of view, we believe we'd see the big benefit would be from conservation rather than charges. As you're probably aware, 7% of people use 30% of the water, and we believe the vast majority of that is down to leakage. So we believe that if we engage with people, we'll give people plenty of notice that they're using excessive water. We'll engage them, we'll do everything we can to repair leaks to save us the cost of treating, the cost of chemicals, cost of electricity, the cost of pumping it around the place is extremely expensive. So we see the big benefit for us, for both the utility but also nationally, is the reduction in wastage in water and increase in conservation. People who have households, large households, can apply for additional allowances, and people with special circumstances or medical needs can apply for exemption as well. So we don't see this, we think a very small number of people will actually end up paying. And that certainly our intention is to do everything is to get that number as small as possible. We're not interested in the revenue as much as we are in reducing leakage and promoting conservation.
Anybody else want to come in? Eamon? Or sorry.
Yeah, no, just to reiterate, I think the Irish Water set out the position in terms of the CRU obviously is independent, but their job is to implement the policy that was recommended by the Joint Oireachtas Committee and which was enacted in the Water Services Bill by these houses.
All right. Martin?
Madam Chairman, and I might just start. I hadn't intended to, but I just start. As a person with a declared disability, and as a matter of fact, the only member of the current Oireachtas with a declared disability, I could ask you for the percentages. Have you met your 6% requirement in terms of public service obligations, in terms of achieving employment of people with disabilities? And I could also ask you how many of your senior management has a declared disability, but I won't, because it's not appropriate to do it, and it certainly isn't appropriate to embarrass public servants who are just doing their job on a global issue of that nature. So I'd just like to very much distance myself from what happened earlier on. That said, I do have just a couple of short questions. Just like Irish Water, maybe, if they could talk me through how they deal with planning applications. I have a particular situation in Clare where a hotelier is applying for additional accommodation, which is badly needed in the tourism area. And it's out on further information on the basis that essentially the council have a concern about overcapacity in terms of the water and sewage. Now, the architect or the agent on behalf of this client contacted Irish Water in November, and as of now, as of yesterday, they haven't received either an acknowledgement or a reference number even, so as they can follow up the query and I suppose try and come back with a response to Clare County Council. The situation is that it's on further information. Obviously, consent or an agreement with Irish Water is necessary. I just also point out that a further information period is allowed for 6 months, and following on from that, then it becomes invalid. So it doesn't really give people much time to deal with an application. We're now the middle of February. The further information was looked for last October. So, I mean, I'm just concerned, what is your process? How do you handle this type of situation? And is it appropriate that an agent wouldn't even get an acknowledgement from you going back to last November?
Okay, Eamon.
So I don't doubt the facts of what you're saying to me, and we'll certainly follow it up. If they are correct, I do apologise. It's not the standards we set for ourselves, and that's not acceptable for the people involved. They should get a reference number straight up for a pre-connection inquiry, or indeed a full inquiry. If you give me the specifics of the details, we'll follow it up. The normal process is that it can take up to 10 weeks to get through the system, either a pre-connection inquiry or a full inquiry or a full application for a connection. There are a lot of steps between, capacity planning, all that kind of stuff. So it is a long process, not unlike other utilities, but it is a long process. But the customer should be informed all the way through. And if you do give me the specifics of that case, I will follow it up.
I will. No, I appreciate that. Now, just on one other issue. Basically, obviously, there's a lot of towns and villages who are looking for an upgrade in terms of their wastewater, sewage, etc. But there are a number of towns, particularly in tourism areas, where applications are lodged and they come back. The response is it's premature ahead of the basically upgrading of the wastewater sewage system. And the problem is that these villages are being left behind. And I can think of two, and it can be very, very frustrating for the villages involved that there are people willing to spend money, extend businesses, develop badly needed housing, etc. But if an application goes in, they're just told it's premature ahead of the infrastructure being developed. What criteria are you using in terms of identifying and I suppose proceeding with these type of developments, particularly in rural tourism areas? And I know the Clare County Council are so frustrated at this stage in terms of schemes that they've actually applied through the Rural Regeneration Programme for two schemes in County Clare, one in Broadford and another one in Clare. Now, to be quite frank about it, a lot of people would view that the Rural Regeneration Scheme is not the appropriate vehicle that funding should be provided for this type of scheme, that really and truly it is the responsibility of the Department of the Environment and Local Government. So I suppose the questions for Irish Water and the Department, what's happening with these schemes? Are communities just going to be left on the long finger infinitum?
Thanks, Deputy. I suppose first, similar to the response I gave to Deputy Casey earlier, we've specific programmes targeted at smaller villages and to try and maintain and assist with development in rural villages and small towns and villages. It's both through the LIHAF programme, but also through our current capital investment programme. I suppose the criteria that we use, obviously we're guided by the National Planning Framework, and then we're guided by the local authority development plans. But we do make funding specifically available to local authorities, whereby if there's a particular small town or village or rural community that they want to develop, they have the discretion to use that funding. So we work very closely with the local authorities. But I suppose, like your specific thing in terms, we'll say application is premature. It probably relates back a little bit to the previous discussion around where our priority sort of capital investment programme was targeted initially. But like I said, that is now swinging very much towards the wastewater side. Okay.
Just follow on that. So if the local authority said that the top three priorities in a county are A, B and C, so for example, if Clare County Council were to make a submission or an application to yourselves and said that Broadford and Clare specifically were their number one and number two priorities, what kind of a time frame would you be looking at then to move these on?
Because realistically, with the development of any infrastructure, the minimum you're looking at is probably a 5-year horizon by the time you go out and go through the various statutory processes, like identifying a site, getting planning permission. It may require a CPO. So there's probably a time frame that you can't really cut back on. So I suppose best case scenario, I'd be saying, would probably be 4 to 5 years.
And finally then, why did Irish Water consent to applying for those two schemes through the Rural Regeneration Fund? Did you think it was appropriate to do that?
I'm not familiar with the consent that Irish Water would have given, but I'm quite happy to take it up and to check it out and get back to you specifically.
Because you see, what it does is it creates confusion and builds expectations within communities that may not be realistic. I'd love to see the two projects being funded through the Rural Regeneration Scheme, but I just think we just need to have clear communication in these things.
Erdal, do you want to come in? Sorry.
So I just come in on that, from the point of view of the multi-annual rural water programme, to note that the Minister announced funding measures under the new programme last week, and one of the specific measures which is new relates to what are described as community connections, to allow communities to come together to seek funding under the programme through the department, to develop out community water schemes for drinking water and for wastewater. So there's a funding stream there, grants of up to a maximum of 85% of the cost, which would amount to €7,650 per household to allow those schemes to go ahead. So local authorities have been invited to submit bids under the scheme, and that will happen over the next few weeks. But just to say that that arose out of the review that was put in place following on from the joint Oireachtas committee hearings and the report from 2017. The Minister put that review in place to look at how the rural water programme operated, and then there's a second part of that review which looks at the long-term needs in relation to rural water. And I think there's a general acknowledgement that there are deficits in infrastructure, so the immediate issue was to address what can be done now through the rural water programme, and that's been done. And then there's a long-term issue, and that report is expected to the Minister later this year. So on that group, you have, say, the National Federation of Group Water Schemes, the Department of Community and Rural Development, EPA, the local authorities and so on, the HSE. So you have a broad-based group. So I think there are measures being put in place in the short term and plans being put in place in the long term, but just to acknowledge that.
That's great. Thanks, Chairman. Thanks, Ken.
Yes, sorry, just a couple of follow-up questions. I certainly get the sense from the engagements we've had of this nature over the last number of years that there is a far greater kind of coordination between the different bodies. So I just want to acknowledge that. But I do, I suppose, want to go back to the appendices in the EPA 2017 report. So it's absolutely the case that there's been a significant improvement in terms of the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive non-compliant locations, and you can see that in the figures. But the rate of improvement in the other areas is far, far slower. So, for example, if you take Appendix A, the priority areas, so obviously we've had a reduction from 148 to 132, so it's about a 10% improvement rate there. If you look at the areas discharging waste water, again, a reduction from 44 to 38, so there's about a 40% improvement. If you look at the pressure water bodies, reduction from 59 to 57. Now, I can fully understand why, on foot of an ECJ decision, the priority would go into tackling those. I suppose my worry, however, is on all those other areas, the EPA, year after year, are raising these very significant number of cases. And I suppose I would share the concern that Tom very diplomatically put in his commentary, that the speed of improvement in those other areas is clearly much slower than with those that are in breach of the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive. So my question is, and I know we're dealing with data that's from 2017 and we're now in 2019, so my question is, when we get the EPA's report for 2018, will we see much bigger improvements in those 3 or 4 appendices? That will kind of evidence the fact that the increased investment and increased coordination between the various players. And if I'm not reading the report right, please let me know. The second thing is sorry, Fergal, you mentioned new infringement proceedings, so maybe if you could give us a bit of information about those, if you don't mind, and where they're at. And Eamon, I suppose one of the big concerns, and we've had plenty of debates about the charge for so-called wasteful usage, but one of the concerns is obviously the cost of repair. So while that figure of that 7% of households is clearly there, we don't know whether they're using that water or that water is leaking as a result of older properties, for example, and whether or not those householders, even if you give them plenty of notice, will have the financial capacity to upgrade their own systems. Is there going to be, are you looking at, in your conversations with the Department of Government, is there a conversation about how to enhance the assistance for households that simply won't be able to financially cover the cost? I'm thinking particularly in rural Ireland, particularly older people, maybe in families that could be asset rich but income poor, to ensure that nobody will be charged for something that they're not using, but that could be as a result of a lack of access to, for example, repair, costs of repairs, etc.
Okay, Eamon.
Yeah,
So again, we have excuse me, a well-established first fix free scheme, which you're probably very familiar with. Look, without straying into changes in policy and that, our interest is in saving the water, and we'll do whatever we can to work with the customers to save them, and we'll be as reasonable as we possibly can. Again, we have rules about stopcocks inside and outside and all that kind of stuff. We'll work around that if necessary to help people. We certainly don't want to be penalising elderly people who have a leak inside their house that can't repair something under their driveway. We've absolutely no interest in that, so we will absolutely work with them. It would be very difficult to say that you can commit to do everything free for everybody, go into everybody's house and sort out their plumbing, but look, I think your point is well made, Deputy. There are people who genuinely would want to work with us who don't have the wherewithal to effect repairs, and we will deal with that as sympathetically as possible, and we'll work with them to make sure that, like, as I say, we want to avoid people paying these charges, not to enforce them.
Okay. I just have do you want to come in? Sorry. Okay, Michael, you go ahead, then I'll go to Fergus.
Just on the priority action list that you mentioned, Deputy, I suppose, like 2018, and as Eamon alluded to, in 2018 we got 6 of the untreated agglomerations off. We're hoping to get 2 off in 2019. So it does take time. For various reasons it takes time, but they are all on a trajectory to 2021 that the vast majority will be dealt with. And in terms of the priority action list that you speak of, at the end of 2018 there's 132 plants on that. By the end of 2019 that will be down to 104. By 2020, 98. By 2021...
At the end of 2018 there's 132?
132, yeah.
Because there was 132 at the end of 2017?
Yeah, but some would have been added and some would have been removed in the interim.
Okay.
Yeah, so,
but
like as assessments are carried out, and I suppose working with the EPA, I think we're sort of coming to a convergence of views as regards what should be on it and what shouldn't be on it. So, like the PAL is really sort of in its infancy. It's not different to the remedial action list that was there for the drinking water, and the exact same approach will be taken to it, and it will be very targeted investment to get those schemes off the PAL.
Do you mind me asking then, because these obviously affect, like there's 24 counties that are including those 132. At what point in your programme do you expect to see that number to start to reduce significantly?
Significantly, by 2021 it will be down to around 70, and then it should be falling away after that. I suppose, and I'd expect that even by 2021 that it would be lower than 70. The problem is with new ones that have been added, we haven't carried out the full detailed assessment yet as regards what mitigation or investment is needed for it.
Thanks.
But again, it is targeted investment to deal with that, and we are working closely with the EPA on it. But I suppose I don't want to be sort of setting any illusions for when the 2018 report is published in 2019. These things take time, but then when they start, I suppose we try and, our investment programme works in bundles, so we try and progress a number of schemes at the same time. So when they start coming to construction, a lot will come to completion at the same time, and then you should see a step improvement.
Colin, you want to come in there?
Sure. Just to clarify, there's a couple of initiatives ongoing and they're reflected in our River Basin Plan, which was published last year. And keeping in mind, we're beginning to put manners on our approach to dealing with non-compliances. So our primary objective, and it's reflected on page 63 of the River Basin Plan, is to achieve full compliance with the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive. But thereafter then, it's also looking at protected areas such as bathing waters, shellfish waters, high status catchments, and then priorities that have been identified in the River Basin Plan as we prioritise areas. So that's going to have an impact, and we will start to take bigger chunks, if you like, off that list. Also an important initiative is, and again it's committed to on page 67 of the River Basin Plan, the agency will review urban wastewater discharge licences based on better evidence base as well. So when we actually do the reassessments, this may actually change that list as well, that things may not be as non-compliant as we had thought. And we're in the process of trying to put resources in place within the agency to carry out that review on a prioritised and targeted basis. So there are a couple of things that are ongoing which we will start to get a better handle on that list.
Thank you, Chair. Just in relation to the infringement action, we got a letter of formal notice, which is the first stage in any possible action recently from the Commission. in relation to the Water Framework Directive. It, I think, revisits a number of areas that had come up previously that we had hoped to have dealt with in a water environmental bill, which didn't proceed, given other priorities in the water side. So it deals. It's quite lengthy, but a lot of it is technical in relation to definitions, whether our definitions are completely aligned with the directive, as well as some substantive issues. For example, in relation to the absence of control and abstractions, which is what the abstraction bill is to deal with. So we just received it. As it is quite complex. So we'll be engaging with it ourselves to try and understand the full implications, and then going back to the Commission. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to clarify one particular issue just under discussion there around the priority areas as set out in the EPA's report on wastewater treatment plants. That list of priorities is set on our current and ongoing assessment. So we have a lot of confidence in that list. That's the list that we use to discuss with Irish Water around priorities. I think what was referred to in terms of the 6-yearly review was it's part of it. It's a piece. It's in the legislation that wastewater treatment plants have to be, their licenses have to be reviewed every 6 years. So it's a separate legislative requirement that has to be complied with, and I suppose that's what we're in negotiations with the Department in terms of workforce planning around that piece.
Okay. I just want to ask a few follow-up questions, specifically around the comma, maybe more specifically to the Department. What are the significant issues that remain outstanding before any Council text is agreed? Can you inform the committee as to the position of other Member States on this proposal, and is there a divergence of views across the other states?
Is this the new directive? Is it the recast directive?
Just as a few more, so I'll give them.
Yeah.
Just, and have the EU institutions modified their proposals, or are they receptive to modify based on the subsidiary concerns raised in the National Assembly? What is the new anticipated timeline for the progression of the dossier, and is there any indication of an implementation date? Is it likely that this proposal will still have a substantial impact on Ireland?
The situation is that the progress has been quite slow with the proposal. There isn't yet a mandate to the Presidency to enter into the trilogue negotiations with Parliament and the Commission as yet. As you know, the Presidency is now with Romania. My own view, looking at the way things have proceeded, it could be June before there's an actual mandate to enter negotiations. So I'd say the engagement will probably happen during the Finnish Presidency. In relation to the recent opinion, which was issued by Parliament last year, it was one of 4 recent opinions from a number of Member States, including the UK, Austria and the Czech Republic, and the Germans had some concerns as well. There were issues around concerns around subsidiarity and proportionality, and that has certainly informed our position. Sorry? No, yeah, sorry, I thought you were holding something for me to see.
Sorry.
So it certainly informed our engagement at the Working Party on Environment in terms of our position. There has been, now keeping in mind these are discussions within Council and Member State positions, there has been a significant shift which does address the concerns of this committee here in terms of subsidiarity. There is now more, if you like, flexibility reflected in the Council version of the text or proposal for the text for Member States to implement as they see fit rather than being dictated to in terms of the way the text was phrased in the original proposal. The monitoring requirements have also shifted and are more proportional in terms of smaller agglomerations or smaller water supplies, particularly the group water schemes sector, are much more happier with what's being proposed now. That according as the supplies get smaller, the obligation to monitor has been reduced, and we've had ongoing discussions with Irish Water and the National Federation of Group Water Schemes, and indeed the EPA. Also, I think the committee in the recent opinion had mentioned the particular issue of the standards that were being proposed going beyond the WHO recommendations. And again, the Council version has shifted that back towards the WHO standards. So I think they were the three issues that were raised. But as I say, progress has been slow, but we would expect that by the end of the Romanian presidency, there should be a mandate to enter trilogue negotiations.
And thanks just to the EPA in relation to the extent of unsustainable drinking water and contamination. Have we any stats in relation to illness that have come from the contaminated water? Or
It's quite difficult to trace it directly back to drinking water supplies, particularly public water supplies. We know there have been some concerns in relation to in Loch Talls, where that supply is on a boil water notice now in Sligo, and will remain on one until the supply is upgraded. The Health Protection Surveillance Centre do gather statistics on incidents of illnesses, and they do trace them back to determine where they are associated with water supplies. There haven't been any that we've been made aware of that are related to public water supplies. There are incidents that are linked and associated with private wells, but not directly with public water supplies that we're aware of.
okay, and just one or two more, and this is probably both Irish Water and the Department, is relation to public group water schemes. And I understand that there's a few connections out there that take the water from a public source and distribute it through a private network of piping. So where's the responsibility in that specific scenario? If you could maybe give me an answer on that, or where does it lie, the responsibility?
The answer is it depends, and I know that's not the answer you want to hear, but so there's a multitude of things. So, for example, in some cases, the local authority traditionally supplied the water just off the public main into the group water scheme and did it free of charge. In some cases, they charge. In some cases, they do some bits of maintenance. Some cases, they don't. In some cases, there are orphan schemes where they were run by a group water scheme and they're not any longer. We're engaging through the department both with individual schemes up and down the country where some schemes want to hand it back, some schemes want to continue on, but they want maybe some work done on the supply that we give to them. On a general policy thing, like we couldn't take on 300,000 customers in the morning. We just wouldn't be able to. We wouldn't be geared up. We wouldn't have the OPEX available to us to manage and maintain that size of a network. But over time, we do believe where group water schemes want us to take in charge, a process will have to be agreed, funding will have to be agreed, and we're willing to deal with that as we're required to. In the meantime, there are financial supports go to the group water schemes. I know the department can talk about that, and a lot of them want, and they don't want any interference from us. They want to get on and do their own thing. So there's a lot of historic precedent down there, there's custom and practice, there's practicalities, and there's a mixture of all that, and we deal with them each as best we can. I mean, over the Christmas period, for example, a group water scheme ran out of water and we supply tankers even though it's not our network. Now, we can't run a big, an alternative system without the supporting funding, and before we take on a scheme, it needs to be brought up to a certain standard. We won't leave anybody stuck. We will work with all the current arrangements that are there, but as it stands at the moment, unless we've taken them in charge, they are the responsibility of the group water scheme.
Hey,
I mean, on that, I suppose to say on the public group water schemes, these are the group water schemes that are supplied by Irish Water. The data on quality tends to indicate that the quality is high. It's pretty much on a par with what's there on the public network. And in addition to that, there are funding measures under the Rural Water Programme to support improvements in the infrastructure. And Eamon from Irish Water had mentioned around schemes that want to be taken in charge by Irish Water. There's a specific funding stream there which covers 100% of the cost to bring deficient infrastructure up to standard, so it can be taken in charge. And in 2018, 21 schemes were taken in charge under that arrangement. There was 15 in 2017, 13 in 2016. And then that's in addition to, say, the funding streams available to the private group water schemes, and there's I suppose, significant funding supports there in terms of the support for infrastructure improvements, but also the ongoing subsidies, the operational subsidies, which were significantly improved with effect from the 1st of January 2018. So there are, I suppose, mechanisms in place, policy mechanisms and funding streams put in place to support the quality objectives and to make sure that the quality and public health issues are addressed.
Okay. I'll probably follow up on Martin's point of view, and I would have raised it earlier in relation to rural towns and villages. And basically what we're saying is that the only source of funding for towns and villages is LIHAF or the Town and Village Renewal Scheme. There's no policy in Irish Water where you're going to start investing in our smaller towns and villages directly.
There is as part of our draft investment plan at the moment. So
your draft?
It is, yeah, but that'll be coming into, just find the detail here.
I suppose just from rural communities, a lot of them are in trouble at the moment, and the population is going out of them. Do you know what I mean? And the schools are beginning to suffer from a number point of view. And a lot of these have no capacity. They're on mains, water and storage, but the capacity is gone. And there's no new development can happen in these villages. And I'm just wondering, it's a draft policy, but I'd be interested to know, because in fairness, LIHAF, you will never get LIHAF for a village. It's unlikely. It's needed for the larger scale developments that's been used to open up road networks and everything. And then we're solely relying on a town and village and renewal scheme to try and get villages up and running, which I don't think is an appropriate scheme for it. So maybe you can give me something in this draft that will keep me happy today.
Under the National Planning Framework, there are specific, I suppose, a need identified for small rural villages, small towns and villages, and it's that, I suppose, criteria within the National Planning Framework that within our investment plan, which is currently a draft, that we're proposing that we'll be able to support that initiative in terms of development in those rural settlements.
And the guidance for that, is that driven by the local authority, or how is it driven in relation to how small villages are qualified?
Primarily the local authority.
So the local authority will identify where they believe the investment should be made.
Yeah.
And just to say, in addition to what Michael is talking about there, and we referred to it earlier in the National Water Resources Plan, we'll be visiting every single local authority this year, talking about where they need investment, where they need networks extended or additional capacity. Not saying we can answer all the issues for them, but we'll be going to every single one of them with at least 2 visits to go through county by county what exactly they need and where they see the need being. We also have we're developing, and we have published the first round of capacity registers, so the local authorities are able to see exactly what water and wastewater capacity is available in their area, and also then on top of that, what plans are in place for upgrades or new plants coming in. In some cases, the deputies raised it earlier, there can be a wait until a plant gets upgraded, and that does frustrate people. If you want to build a house, you want to build it now, not in 3 years' time. But all that will at the very least be transparent. And again, after we've spoken to all the local authorities, done the tour of the country, we'll have a much better idea of the pain points.
Okay. It's just coming from a village around what sits on the Bartry Reservoir and is looking ahead every day, and it doesn't have any water. It's very hard to take for the community there that they're giving water to Dublin every day of the week and can't simply get a pipe from Bartry Reservoir back to Roundwood. But anyway, that's just another example of it. Any other questions? All right. I would like to thank all the witnesses for attending today and engaging with the committee. The meeting is now adjourned, and the next meeting of the Joint Committee will be next Wednesday, the 20th of February at 9:30 p.m. Detailed scrutiny of the anti-eviction bill. 9:30 a.m. Sorry, I didn't specify a.m. Detailed scrutiny of the anti-eviction bill 2018 and residential tenancies, greater security of tenure and rent certainty bill 2017. Thanks, everyone.